The following podcast is brought to you by the Station of the Cross. Thank you for listening.
Change our home life. Change the way we educate our children.
It is the presence of God. He promised to leave. I will not leave you orphans.
Dear brothers and sisters, the Holy Spirit is with you.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host on the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. As always, let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, through the intercession of St. Ignatius Loyola, we ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment, that we might hear your voice and obey your command. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our topic today is politics and the papacy. We have an especially qualified guest to discuss it. It's George Neumayr, a well-known author. He's the co-author of the national bestseller, No Higher Power, Obama's War on Religious Freedom. He's contributing editor to the American Spectator, was op-ed editor for Investment Business Daily, and has written in politics and religion for many publications, including the Washington Times, the Daily Caller, National Review, Human Events, New Oxford Review, and The Guardian. And he's the former editor of Catholic World Report and a former media fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution. Most recently, he wrote The Political Pope, How Pope Francis is Delighting the Liberal Left and Abandoning Conservatives. George, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
George, I have to admit, I recently read the book for a second time. As a faithful Catholic, as a priest, as a Jesuit who's trained to have special solicitude for the papacy, this was a hard book to read. What was it like for you to be immersed in this, and how did it come to pass that you decided you needed to write this book?
Well, I from the very first moment I saw Pope Francis, I got the sense that this was going to be a very consequential pontificate, and the very first column, one of the very first columns I wrote about him was, I think it was called "Reading the Papal Tea Leaves," and in that article, I made the case that Francis represented a departure from the restorationism of John Paul II and Benedict XVI, and that I did not see him. I basically said he was not going to pursue their agenda, and that he was going to actually, basically take the church back to the 1970s. The church was going to take a U-turn back to the 1970s, back to the politics, the left-wing politics of the 1970s that saturated the church, and back to the liberal theology of the church, which saturated the church in the 1970s. And that is exactly what has happened. And so from that, I began thinking actually about writing a book on this Pope within the first, weeks of his pontificate. And I wrote a lot of articles, and as I was writing articles, it just, became clearer and clearer to me that this pontificate, which I see as a very catastrophic one, had to be documented in book form.
When you use the phrase restorationist, could you explain for our listeners what you mean there?
Well, I mean, John Paul II and Benedict XVI recognized that a lot of the problems in the church were due to a very liberal application of the documents of Vatican II, and that had caused a great deal of chaos and scandal and disruption in the church. And so they were trying to restore a more proper understanding of church teaching and discipline to Catholic life, and that's what I mean by restorationism. And
I see.
This Pope does not support that vision. He, unlike John Paul II and Benedict XVI, objected very loudly to the liberal interpretation of Vatican II. this Pope does not share that perspective. He supports the liberal interpretation of Vatican II. And, I think in one of the interviews, he actually implicitly criticizes his two immediate predecessors when he says very little was done in the last, 40 years, he says, with respect to, I think he was talking in terms of reaching out to other religions and reaching out to non-Christian religions. He said very little was done to liberalize the church in this regard. And he was sort of criticizing his predecessors there, and he was saying, "Well, I have the courage to do this. I have the courage to apply a liberal interpretation of Vatican II completely." But that in effect was what he was saying. And you can go back to I cite that interview in my book, and I think it's an implicit criticism of his immediate predecessors.
I'm puzzled by this reference to lack of engagement with the world religions because, John Paul's universal prayer meetings, if you will, in Assisi caused a lot of controversy. And so I don't understand the nature of what Francis was trying to communicate there.
I think he's criticizing them for flirting with but not marrying religious relativism, which he has done. He is more, as I say in the book, he's enthusiastic about every religion except his own. He has great enthusiasm for Islam. He has great enthusiasm for all the Protestant denominations. He has great enthusiasm for Buddhism, Judaism. Where is that enthusiasm for Catholicism? I don't see any evidence. He's usually criticizing the most devout members of the Catholic faith. He calls them rigid. He calls them, pharisaical. He mocked their religiosity and said, "Why are they saying all these rosaries for me?" As I document in the book, he said to a little kid, an altar boy, who had his hands together, holding his hands together piously. He said to this boy, "Are your hands stuck together?" And the boy was bewildered, wondered, what is he saying? And it's that kind of humor is very typical of the kind of modern churchmen who see what I would call religious relativism as something mandated by Vatican II. Of course, it wasn't mandated, and of course that religious relativism is completely contrary to magisterial teaching.
Would you be willing to connect the dots between religious relativism, all religions are the same or they all lead to the same place, and then go from there to say that that's going to be coupled by a moral relativism? Yeah, well, I think there is, the who am I to judge, what are the signature phrases of this pontificate? Who am I to judge is, I would say, the signature phrase of this pontificate. That, smacks of relativism, because in fact it was said in the context of justifying the appointment of an openly, a flagrantly homosexual, scandal-plagued guy, Monsignor Battista Ricca. He was the Pope had named him to be the ecclesiastical head of the Vatican Bank, and Sandro Magister, a Vatican correspondent in Rome, had written this article detailing all the homosexual scandals that Ricca had touched Ricca's life, and one of them was that he was once found in a elevator. He was trapped in an elevator with a rent boy, and the firemen had to pry them out of there. That was one of the scandals. And at any rate, Francis was asked about Magister. Basically, was asked about these charges and about Ricca, and he said, "Oh well, who am I to judge if So it was really said in a very scandalous context, and it's such it's a mischievous remark, and the reason why the world gobbled that up, the reason why the liberal elite gobbled that up, is that they were thrilled to have a pope who was echoing their relativism and their criticism of the church as too rigid and too focused on morality. And, another famous quote of this pope is that he said, the church is too preoccupied with abortion and gay marriage and contraception. Remember when he said that? I think he said obsessed.
Yeah, he said
apparently we're talking about that all the time.
Yeah,
which was news to me. I must have missed that.
Yeah, which is a joke because if anything, the church has been, in the West at least, preaching has been marked by a complete absence of mentions of any of those things. And Cardinal Dolan said that before. Remember, there was a Wall Street Journal
Yes, you beat me to it. I was going to say the
that.
same thing. Yeah, Cardinal Dolan said we've been gun shy all these years, talking about Humanae Vitae and so on. I mean, present company accepted, of course. And then there was the reference to proselytism as solemn nonsense. What do you make of that?
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, that's unfortunately. I mean, that is very typical of this Pope, is that he sees Catholic evangelization. He caricatures Catholic evangelization as proselytizing. Which it's not. I mean, it's not. Are there any Catholic evangelists out there who want to forcibly convert people? No, of course not.
Right.
But he treats any kind of proposal of Catholicism as the one true religion as evidence of a desire to convert people forcibly, which is ridiculous. It's not. There's a difference, obviously, between saying Catholicism is the ark of salvation that Jesus Christ intended for mankind, and forcing people to enter, become Catholics. Obviously, there's a difference between those two things, and yet he acts like they're one and the same.
George, you're obviously a believing Catholic. You're not an iconoclast. You don't have an animus against the Church, and you're writing a book and you've been doing some other work recently that is really, very challenging, and some people would find unsettling. Or has anyone suggested to you that this is somehow impious or indecorous or even scandalous to do this research and to be so vocally critical of Church leadership?
Yeah, that's a pretty common criticism, but it's an unserious one, because obviously I'm doing this out of love for the Church, out of love out of a desire to preserve the integrity of the faith and to make sure that the Church in her human dimension is holy and that in her teaching is orthodox. And that's what's motivating this. I don't, I'm a lifelong Catholic. I was born a Catholic, and I take the faith very seriously, and I think that charity, true charity, means that we want every single human being on the earth, if possible, to enter into the eternal and infinite life of God, which is the source, which is the only thing that can possibly fulfill human nature. And, we should want that for every human being, which means that we should want the Catholic Church to be as holy and effective and orthodox as possible, because that's the only thing that's going to increase the chances of people going to heaven. If you have a corrupt Catholic Church in her human dimension, fewer souls will be saved. That's the bottom line.
Thank you. When we come back, we're going to discuss what we need to know about Jorge Bergoglio of Argentina in order to understand the man we call Pope Francis in Rome. We want you to be part of the conversation. Get in line to call us now at 1-877-511-5483. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Tune in weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern Time for Sermons for Everyday Living. There's no better way to start your day than by tuning in to hear real sermons from real priests on topics important to you and your faith. For details about upcoming episodes and for podcasts of past shows, visit thestationofthecross.com and click on Sermons for Everyday Living under the Programs tab. That's Sermons for Everyday Living, weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
This is the Pope Paul VI Institute Minute with Dr. Tom Hilgers.
On August 6, 1978, Pope Paul VI died. This was the Feast of the Transfiguration. After Mass that day, my wife Sue and I agreed that we needed to build a lasting memorial to Pope Paul VI and his encyclical letter, Humanae Vitae. It wasn't until 1985 that we were able to really open the doors of this Pope Paul VI Institute for the study of human reproduction. The Institute is now the home of the Creighton Model System, which is a moral means and an extremely accurate means for fertility regulation, unlike the old rhythm method. The Institute is the home of naprotechnology. It is a home of science at the service of the human person. Until next time, I'm Dr. Tom Hilgers.
For a complimentary gift and more information on the Pope Paul VI Institute, log on to www.popepaul6, that's Roman numeral 6.com.
The developing systems of a human baby are more or less complete by 8 weeks of pregnancy, but will require another 7 months inside his mother before he is ready to emerge. During that 7 months, his weight will multiply up to 1,000 times. and all of his systems get to practice working in unison. Human life is sacred. Think about it. CoalitionForLife.com.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call into the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. Each morning, the Catholic Current sends out a short survey on the topic for today's show so that you can share your thoughts and any questions you might have. This is a great way to participate, especially if you aren't able to call in live. A few of the responses will be read over the air to add to the discussion, so make sure you sign up to receive our emailed survey at thestationofthecross.com.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host on the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. Our topic today is politics and the papacy. Our very qualified guest is author George Neumayr, whose latest book is The Political Pope, How Pope Francis is Delighting the Liberal Left and Abandoning Conservatives. George, in this segment, we'd like to talk about how Jorge Bergoglio of Argentina became whom we call Pope Francis of Rome. What was the influence of his early life, his culture? And I noticed you wrote some about his mentor, whom he referred to as the boss.
Right. He worked at a laboratory when he was a teenager. He worked at a laboratory in Buenos Aires, and his boss was a very full-blown communist activist, and she, according to Bergoglio himself, was an immense influence on his political education. She introduced him to communist literature, to communist periodicals. Bergoglio said that his favorite periodical came from the Argentinian Communist Party. He said he'd rush to get his hands on the weekly edition of the Argentinian Communist Party's publication. And he said that his favorite writer was Leon Barletta, who was a very famous communist filmmaker in Argentina. He said he devoured the writings of Leon Barletta, and who would have been sort of like the communist version of Michael Moore, I guess, in Argentina. But this woman had an enormous influence on him, according to Bergoglio, and that he said he learned about the Rosenberg trial from her, that she would talk to him about the Rosenberg trial. But the most interesting thing he said was that he said what she got from communism, which influenced me, and which I came to appreciate communism because of her. I found what she found in Marx, I found in Catholic social justice or Catholic social justice teaching. And I find that a very alarming remark, because the two things do not come out in the same place. Marxism
right.
and Catholic
Philosophically,
social
theologically, Marx's teaching on nearly anything is simply incompatible with revelation and with natural law. And certainly Marx and communism has been condemned repeatedly by popes. Friends, we want you to be part of the conversation. Call us now at 1-877-511-5483. Text us at the same number, 1-877-511-5483. George, Marx is not really open to the transcendent, of course. Everything is material. Everything is economic. Given his interest in Marxism and communism at an early age, could that begin to explain what some people have described as the this-worldly emphasis of this papacy? Denouncing capitalism, migration, the weather, climate change, environment, and so on. Is that a fair assessment to make, in your view?
Yeah, and that's the deep irony here in all of this is that the Pope's, is the most materialistic minded Pope in perhaps the history of the Church. He seems to think that you can't have a good human life unless you have as many cars as as many BMWs as a CEO, and it's kind of a ridiculous way of looking at life. That we can't rest until everybody until every person in society has the same number of houses, the same number of cars, the same number of vacations. That's a very materialistic outlook, and the Pope seems to be pursuing or advancing that sort of mindset, and that we have to be talking about material things all the time, and how certain people are deprived of material things. Otherwise, we're not being true to the good of human life or something, the good of man. But that's it's a very materialistic point of view, and yet we're told that this Pope doesn't care about material things. Of course, he does care about material things. He wants, he thinks that his primary mission on this earth is to ensure the equal distribution of goods, and that everybody should be making the same salary and all that stuff. And we have to be upset until that day arrives. But it's absurd. And it's contrary to human freedom. It's contrary to the will of God, which is hierarchical, actually. God made reality hierarchical, which means that he made reality unequal. And that's actually why Marx, when Marx was a college student, he was a Satanist. He became a Satanist. And he said the reason why he became a Satanist was that he hated the way God had set up the world. He didn't like the hierarchical character of the world. And so he wanted, like Satan, he wanted to shatter that hierarchical character of the world and create the world anew through his own will, through his own vision. And unfortunately, I think that this Pope has been contaminated by that kind of ideology. This Pope has been contaminated by many of the post-Enlightenment ideologies, the chief one being, of course, Marxism. The Pope says, I've met a lot of Marxists, and they're good people, and the Marxists have stolen our flag, and it's complete and total nonsense. And past popes would look at those remarks and say, what are you talking about? This system that you're seem so sympathetic toward has destroyed the lives, has crushed freedom, killed people. It's been one of the most misery-inducing systems in the history of the world, and you're soft pedaling it. And then we see, did you see that Taranto, the bishop from Argentina, who's very close to Bergoglio, who runs one of the pontifical academies, Bishop Taranto, he said, he said the country that comes the closest to implementing Catholic social justice on the earth is communist China.
Oh, I was struck dumb. I'm usually not at a loss for words, but people thought I'd taken a vow of silence for a week when I saw that. That's incomprehensible to me. It's certainly true that the history of Marxism is soaked in innocent blood. Well, if one has a predisposition towards the materialist, this worldview that we saw in Marx and communism in general, what does that do when one begins to hear about liberation theology?
Well, the line that was peddled unfortunately by the George Weigels at the beginning of this pontificate was that, this Pope has nothing to do with liberation theology. That's not true. He was influenced by liberation theology in Latin America, and you'll see if you read my book, you'll see all of the liberation theologians whom he has rehabilitated, all the liberation theologians that were condemned by John Paul II and Benedict XVI. This Pope has rehabilitated, and he's enlisted their help in the writing of encyclicals. Leonardo Boff is the classic example of that. Boff was defrocked during the pontificate, I believe, of John Paul II, and he was defrocked because he was engaging in all these hijinks at environmental conferences in Rio de Janeiro and things like that. Well, the moment Bergoglio became Pope, he started rehabilitating Boff, and he brought Boff in to help write Laudato Si, and he went to, according to Boff, Bergoglio went to him and he said, I want to see your plans for world government, because one of Boff's causes is that he wants the UN to spearhead world government, and according to Boff, Bergoglio said to him, I want you to show me your plans for the United Nations, building up a kind of world government, but you can't send your plans through any intermediaries. You have to give them to me directly, I think he said to him. Because if you give them to an intermediary, they won't pass it on to me. So at any rate, Boff. Sorry, go ahead. Excuse me.
No, I'm sorry. I'm interrupting. Boff is kind of the revered elder statesman of liberation theology, which is, I don't know if you want to call it a Marxinating of the gospel or a baptism of Marx. We just got a text from a listener who wanted to know, George, if you had anything to say about the Pope's recent meeting with the singer Bono and his relationship with some of the more prominent figures of popular culture.
Yeah, this is the media calls this Pope the cool Pope because he reaches out, to celebrities all the time. And U2, I think, was the first rock music band to perform in the Sistine Chapel. I think that happened in the second or third year of this pontificate. And it, unfortunately, I have to say that this is really embarrassing. It's embarrassing that this Pope has more time for Bono than he has for Orthodox Catholics. He has more time for Bono than he has for, people who've been sent to jail for adherence to their, religious conscience. It's crazy because Bono is actually, Bono is one of the biggest pro-abortion people around. And all of his economic ideas, which are supposedly so good, are not good. So Bono is really an advocate, the West, sending a lot of money to Africa that ends up in the pockets of corrupt dictators. And that doesn't help the poor in the slightest. I'm not saying that Bono doesn't do any good. I'm sure he does.
Right.
I'm sure Bono gives a lot of money to the poor, and I'm sure he's done some good, and I'm not condemning that. But I'm just saying that the ideology which Bono espouses is not good for mankind, and the Catholic Church has no business helping him promote it and becoming a kind of propagandist for that, for the Bonos of the world. And we've seen over and time again that this Pope reaches out to celebrities, like Leonardo DiCaprio, I think, has been to the Vatican a number of times. And one time he brought as a gift, I think, a picture of an overpopulated world, and it's like the Catholic is now, Paul Ehrlich. Didn't Paul Ehrlich speak at the Vatican? He was one of the leading.
I think so. He's a big New Age guru as well.
Yeah, he's a guy. He's a guy who was calling for compulsory abortions in the 70s, and here he is speaking at the Vatican.
Right,
it's insane. And the Sierra Club and all these pro-abortion groups have set up shop at the Vatican, as I document in my chapter on, Pope Francis as the first radical green pope.
And of course, the singer Katy Perry, I think, was brought in to talk about transcendental meditation in Rome. When we come back, we're going to discuss Pope Francis and his intersection with American politics and culture. We certainly want you to be part of the conversation. Get on the line to call us now, 1-877-511-5483. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The Liturgy of the Hours is prayed 3 times a day on the Station of the Cross at 5 a.m., 3 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. Eastern. The Liturgy of the Hours is a meditative and efficacious way to foster habitual prayer. It is the daily prayer of the Church, prayed throughout the world by priests, religious, and laity. For details about each hour or more information about the Liturgy of the Hours, visit thestationofthecross.com.
A map in a mirror. That's how we can view the life and legacy of Archbishop Fulton Sheen. We can look to Archbishop Sheen's faithful witness to the Lord as a guide, helping us to better share our faith with others. And we can hold up our own faithful witness to the Lord, asking how our lives might better reflect Jesus to a world so in need of Him.
And Peter launched out into the deep, and there was the miraculous draught of fishes. So the first part of my priesthood was the priesthood of the consciousness of the call. God summoned me.
Sister Marlene Brownette.
He knew he was a priest all the time, and he believed strongly in presenting the priesthood to people correctly. Even his laughter was a priest's laugh, which didn't make him separate from people. It brought him into the midst of people. Everything about him was priest.
To find out more about the faithful witness of Archbishop Fulton Sheen, visit FultonSheenMission.org.
When I was outside of the church, there was always an unsettled feeling. There was always a feeling of something missing and something not complete. The deal clincher is we found our way to our parish, and we met just an incredible pastor. We learned things that we'd never been taught. I wouldn't be the person that I am without the church and without the sacraments, particularly the Eucharist. I can't live without it.
If you've been away from the Catholic Church, visit CatholicsComeHome.org.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call in to the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. If you miss any portion of today's show or want to listen to any past episodes, click the podcast link under the Programs tab at the top of our homepage, thestationofthecross.com.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. Our topic today is politics and the papacy. Our well-qualified guest is George Neumayr, a journalist, author, whose most recent book is The Political Pope, How Pope Francis is delighting the liberal left and abandoning conservatives. If you're just joining us, you should know that in earlier segments we talked about how the book came to be written. We also talked about how the Argentine background of Jorge Bergoglio influences Pope Francis in Rome. In this segment, we're going to talk about the intersection of Pope Francis with American politics and culture. George, could you tell us some about how the American political establishment greeted Pope Francis?
Well, they had been lobbying, for many, I would say, since the Enlightenment at least, the modern Western world has wanted to put a liberal on the chair of St. Peter, and that's been a long time goal. They've always wanted to co-opt the church through a liberal pope, because they couldn't destroy the church, so the next best thing, if you can't destroy the church, the next best thing is to co-opt it by having your own people run it. And so they were always looking to put a liberal on the chair of St. Peter. And I in some ways, I would say that this pope is you remember how they used to say that Obama is the one we've been waiting for?
Right.
The liberal Western elite, I think, sees this pope and they say, this is the pope we've been waiting for. And he is, the reason why they love him so much is that he is a propagandist for their favorite causes. He's a propagandist for amnesty, which they love. He's a propagandist for climate change activism, which they advance. He's a propagandist for socialism, which they espouse. He's a propagandist for a kind of muddled kind of religious relativism and a kind of moral relativism. Who might
the death
judge,
penalty, of course, also.
Are great. Oh yeah, death. Yeah, there's obviously they like his pacifism. Did you know that this pope is not only opposed to the death penalty, he's also opposed to lifetime imprisonment. He thinks that lifetime imprisonment is contrary to church teaching, which is amazing. And so he thinks that mass murderers, should not be subject to, murderers in general should not be subject to lifetime imprisonment. That we should be releasing Charles Manson, from prison, I guess. And he's obviously, he's got a commission set up to look at changing the church's teaching on just war. And these guys got together a couple of years ago and had a preliminary meeting. And at that meeting, they said, the St. Augustine's just war teaching and St. Thomas Aquinas' just war teaching is passé, and there is no such thing as just war. And so that's why the liberal Western world loves this pope, is that he's a propagandist for their point of view.
George, we have a caller on the line now. We have Ron from Syracuse, New York. Ron, welcome to the Catholic Current. What do you have to say to us today?
Guys, thanks a lot. I love your show. It's the best show on radio, Catholic radio.
Thank you.
EWTN had some things on recently. I guess with the nativity scene last Christmas, right in the back in front of St. Peter's Church.
Oh, boy. Right? Yeah, I know what you're referring to. But let's not go into details because there may be children listening.
Right, and thank you. And a lot of his closest advisors are homosexuals at EWTN. But, gentlemen, here's my big question. What are we going to do about it? You got a pope in there that you know is corrupt. We know it. What can we do but pray about it? I think about Pope Benedict. He didn't get out because he just wanted to relax. There's a reason he got out. There's got to be a big reason why he got out. Maybe he couldn't fight this wave so much. I don't know. I'm just guessing there. But there's something big why he had to get out. Him and John Paul II were close. They had dinner a couple of times a week and everything. Right. Two clones. Now this guy comes in. My big question is, what can we do about it?
Okay. Well, thank you for your call, Ron. George, you want to reply to that?
Yeah, I think there is something we can do about it. We can put as much pressure as possible on the cardinals to stand up to this, bad pope and to put pressure on him to resign. And the cardinals have to not only do that, they have to not only get this bad pope to resign, they also have to make sure that Paroline, who's the Secretary of State, doesn't become the next pope. Because that's
he's known as the vice pope in some circles, isn't he?
Right, and I've been told by a good source, a good source told me that this pope is planning on quitting after Benedict dies, after Ratzinger dies. This pope will quit and then hand the pontificate to Paroline, and we can't let that happen. The good cardinals have to stand up to these guys, and they cannot allow the church to remain in the hands of these destructive modernists and destructive gay mafia members. We have to be honest about the situation. The gay mafia elected this pope, and this pope has been giving all those guys plum positions. Cardinal Wuerl became the most powerful cardinal in Washington as a result of the election of this pope, and it was Wuerl and this pope who made these horrible guys. Tobin is a horrible guy. He was made cardinal of Newark. Supich, who's a horrible guy, was made cardinal of Chicago. McElroy, who's a protege of the gay mafia, San Francisco Archbishop John Quinn, he was given San Diego. And none of this is happening by accident. This is all the result of the gay mafia electing this pope and receiving all these, powerful positions around him. And Paroline will be the next pope unless the good cardinals stand up and make, and push for an actual Catholic, a believing Catholic, to be the next pope. Like I would say somebody like Cardinal Sarah. That should be the goal, is that we have to put pressure on the cardinals to stand up to these guys and then elect somebody like Cardinal Sarah to replace Bergoglio. But Paroline is a diplomatic version of Francis. He shares the same politics, the same liberal politics, and the same liberal theology as Bergoglio. The difference is that Paroline is a lot more circumspect about it, which means that a Paroline pontificate could be even more devastating. He'd be more subtle about destroying the church.
George, when you talk about influence and putting pressure and standing up, what do you mean?
Well, I mean specifically, your listeners should flood the papal nuncio with phone calls. For example, right now, I'm told that the Francis and the people around Francis want to put a really politically and theologically liberal guy like McElroy or John Wester or somebody in that mold into the D.C. to replace Wuerl. And those discussions are going on right now. And Catholics should flood the papal nuncio with calls to the effect that we will not accept somebody like that. We will not accept a McElroy. We will not accept a Supich in D.C. And we will not accept anybody who's connected to the Wuerl McCarrick gay mafia. And so I would advise them, look up, it's very easy, just look up the phone number for Archbishop Pierre, who's the papal, Francis's representative in the United States. Get his phone number, call that number, and just say what I just said. And then some of us with more influence maybe or more access or whatever, we should go to Rome, and I'm actually thinking about doing this, and go to Rome and actively lobby every cardinal, every bishop, every Vatican official we can get access to and persuade them and try to push them to end this destructive pontificate, and then make sure that Paroline doesn't get in there, or somebody like Paroline doesn't get in there. That has to be the goal. Is the next pope has to be a minimally holy and orthodox person. I don't know who exactly that is. It could be Sarah. It could be somebody that I'm not even thinking about. I don't know. It could be that cardinal from Sri Lanka. I don't know. Somebody needs to come up with a good list. But the point is that the cardinals who have the power to do this and have the obligation to do this, because they're the they have the primary duty for ensuring that the faith isn't destroyed.
Right.
They have to step up, but we can make them step up by putting pressure on them and going to them directly, talking to them directly, writing to them directly. And that's the only thing that's going to save us from this catastrophic pontificate and its successors.
George, some of my more cynical, hard-nosed friends said, Father, if you want to influence a large organization, you have to hit them in the wallet. What do you think about the suggestion of withholding funds or directing? If someone has asked me, Father, can you recommend a safe environment for my tithe? Can you recommend a safe environment for my donation? Would you recommend withholding donations or redirecting donations or putting money in an escrow account?
Absolutely. Your listeners and everybody, I think everybody should not give a dime, should not give a penny to all of these bad bishops. To never give a dime to the Archdiocesan Annuals Appeal. Make sure that all of your money goes directly into the hands of good orders and good activities, but never throw it into a general pot. And publicize that you're not doing it. Publicize that you're withholding money from a soupage. Say if you're in Chicago, say out loud, I'm not going to give a dime to soupage because this guy's a bad guy. I'm not going to give him a dime. And say that also to the Vatican charity. Say, I'm not going to give a dime to you guys because you guys are part of the problem. And nothing speaks louder in the church than withholding money. And so, absolutely. That's another way to get the cardinals to step up and end this horrible pontificate. It would be, just communicate to them, we are not going to support this pontificate with our money, period. We'll give money to the missionaries of charity. We'll give money to people who are directly helping the poor. We'll give money to very specific apostolates that are doing good work. We'll help individual priests, but we will not give a dime, a penny, to general funds that go to Francis Church, and which is it ends up in the pockets of people like Donald Worrell, and then they live in these 12,000 square feet penthouses, and guys like Monsignor Walter Rossi, who runs the Basilica of the Shrine of the National Immaculate Conception. This guy has more houses than I've ever had in my life. I've never had one house actually in my life. This guy's got he's got a place in Fort Lauderdale. He's got a place in New Jersey. He has a place in 2 places in D.C. where he can stay. Apparently, he's got places all over the place. And how does he pay for all this? Maybe some of it's family money, but a lot of it's probably coming out of an absurdly large salary he gets as the director of the Basilica, which a position to which he was appointed by the gay rapist Theodore McCarrick. And it was held previously by Bishop Bransfield, who's now under investigation for gay sexual harassment. Those are the 2 patrons of Monsignor Walter Rossi, McCarrick and Bransfield. And both of those guys are bad guys who are charter members of the gay mafia.
When we come back, we're going to look at Pope Francis's intersection with the Church in America in relation to the present crisis. We want you to be part of the conversation. Get on the line now. Call us at 1-877-511-5483. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
I'm Doug Barry, and this is your Battle Ready Minute. Things are heating up in the fight for faith and family. From more and more states falling to the disordered idea of so-called gay marriage, to the federal government trying to force Catholics and other Christians to compromise their religious beliefs through the HHS mandate, we see the battle lines are clearly drawn. With the intensifying attacks against life, marriage, and religious liberty, we all need to ask ourselves the question, what am I doing in response to these diabolical attacks against the things that are most sacred in society? It's easy to allow ourselves to be distracted by the things of this world, or to remain silent because we're concerned about what others will think of us. What we need to be concerned about is what we are saying to God about how important these gifts are to us. Go to usccb.org and find out what we can all do to fight for life, marriage, and religious liberty. Remember, every day is training day, body, mind, and soul. Be battle ready.
Are you prepared for the fight?
Go to radixguys.com and sign up for our daily battle ready emails.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rick Fitzgibbons from the Institute for Marital Healing. Are you looking for ways to strengthen your marital friendship and love? Your marriage can be transformed by learning how to overcome the stress of selfishness, excessive anger, and controlling behaviors. Problems like anxiety and loneliness and other weaknesses can also be overcome through positive communication and self-giving. Visit maritalhealing.com for free, effective advice on identifying these issues and on improving your marriage. That's maritalhealing.com.
I worked in pro baseball for a long time, and we play on Sundays. And it was an easy excuse. I took the easy out and just didn't go to Mass. Got caught up in that whole selfishness, that whole, I can do it all. The times when I was struggling were the times I needed God the most. And now that I've come back and accepted God, my world is completely changed.
If you've been away from the Catholic Church for any reason, visit CatholicsComeHome.org today.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call into the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. Shortly after today's show, visit our page for the Catholic Current at thestationofthecross.com. Here you'll find a link to Father McTague's recommended reading list and a link for downloading the program so that you can share it with your family and friends.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host of the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. Our topic today is politics and the papacy. Our well-qualified guest is George Neumayr, who is the author of The Political Pope, How Pope Francis is Delighting the Liberal Left and Abandoning Conservatives. In this segment, we're going to talk about the role of the papacy in relation to the present crisis in the Church in the United States regarding abuse and clerical malfeasance. Georgia, let's start with, I think, probably one of the most enduring themes, or one of the hottest themes right now in the present crisis, the letter from Archbishop Vigano. Do you have a take on that?
Oh, yeah. Well, that letter was 100% true, and the attacks on Vigano from the Vatican and from the Pope himself were shameful and ridiculous, and it's all driven by guilt. That this Pope knew perfectly well that McCarrick had preyed upon seminarians. He was aware of this, and yet he still rehabilitated him. He still allowed McCarrick to be a papal envoy, globetrotting the world. And by the way, did you know he spent, he'd always go to Saudi Arabia, often McCarrick would go to the Middle East, and he'd say, I love Islam so much, it's a religion of peace. But what he really loved about Islam was that it's very lax towards over-the-hill pederasts like himself. Like McCarrick went to Saudi Arabia more times than Michael Jackson, and there's no accident there. And so the point is that, yes, the gay mafia problem that Vigano speaks to is absolutely true. It's incredibly widespread, and it has to be uprooted completely, not partially, completely. And so, yeah, the Vigano letter represents a very welcome opening shot, in what needs to be a battle for the restoration of purity to the priesthood and to the hierarchy. The hierarchy is full of gay mafia members. And we see that in Bransfield, Bishop Bransfield. He was, his gay sexual harassment apparently was so outrageous, so bad that even this this derelict Vatican had to suspend him and is investigating him for his gay sexual harassment. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, and these other guys have gotten away with it. But they're going to end up like McCarrick too. Some of them are going to. And
Church,
McCarrick,
I have to believe. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to believe that I don't think any of our listeners are as well informed on these matters you are, and I try to be above average informed, and I'm learning things here as you're speaking. What about the people who say this is all too much? This can't be happening. It can't all be true. It can't all be that bad. Do you have anyone who flings the phrase conspiracy theory at you as a way of trying to silence you?
Well, I know that people have a psychological need to prefer the fantasy to the reality. For example, juries will almost never convict a doctor of criminal negligence, and the psychological reason for that is that nobody wants to believe their doctor is going to hurt them.
Right.
And yet they do. Doctors do hurt people, and doctors of souls hurt people. And we can, I guess, prefer the fantasy to the reality and say that never happens, but it does, and it's been happening nonstop for 50-plus years in this country. And that's why we got a McCarrick. We got a guy like McCarrick who started raping a kid at 11 and continued for years and years and years. And then he was forcing seminarians into his bed at his New Jersey beach house. And this was all an open secret. Everybody knew about this. Richard Sipe, the psychotherapist, had written an open letter about this over a decade ago. Donald Wuerl says he didn't know about that. That is complete and total nonsense. He did. All these guys knew. Barry Nestout, the Bishop of Richmond, who got that plum after serving as a gay mafia enforcer for Wuerl and McCarrick, he knew. All these guys knew. It's just one big gay web. And the more you look at it, the more you dig into this stuff, the more frightening it all becomes. And there's a diabolic... I'll tell you just one story that I've learned in the last day or so. which is just goes to just the outrageous, the appalling, the diabolical gay character to the situation in Washington, D.C. Bransfield and Rossi. Bishop Bransfield was the director of the National Shrine before Rossi, and Rossi, before he was the director, was under Bransfield as the director of pilgrimages. Well, these two guys would get together, and after hours, they would hold parties, apparently. I've been told by multiple sources. They would hold parties in the basilica after hours when nobody, would be there. And they would invite to these parties gay priests on the Eastern Seaboard. And one night, I was told this poor security guard, this poor black man who was, didn't want to do it, but had to do it. He had to organize the parking situation for these gay priests who were coming for the Bransfield-Rossi gay party after hours at the basilica. And this poor guy said, the guy nearly had a breakdown. He said that he told this very reliable source of mine that what he saw, he just could not believe. He could not believe that all these gay priests would get together after hours and be making out in the church and making out in the sacristy. And he was so shaken. This woman said that as he was revealing all these details of that evening, he was visibly shaken and nearly had a breakdown. And this kind of stuff was happening a lot under Bransfield and Rossi, and it's still happening. McCarrick finally was stopped by a review board in New York, thank God. But had that review board not existed, McCarrick would still be in business. He'd still be molesting seminarians. He'd still be going around the world pushing leftism in the name of this pontificate, and pushing relativism in the name of this pontificate. McCarrick was the one who came out in favor of gay civil unions. That should have raised red flags. Of course it didn't, because we have a pope who supports gay civil unions. Bergoglio supported gay civil unions in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. And that was one of the first things that tipped me off that this guy was a complete and total fraud.
George, two points come to mind. The first is we hear so often about a pedophilia problem in the church, and there's going to be a meeting in Rome in February regarding the protection of children. So that, on your view, is that a deflection? And then the follow-up question is, because people have asked me, Father, is it unfair to paint all priests with same-sex attraction with the same broad brush? Could you speak to those 2 points, please?
Well, the gay mafia in the church likes to talk about pedophilia. It does not like to talk about pederasty. And the reason why is that pederasty is too close to home. Pederasty means basically the cases involving 15, 16, and 17-year-old boys, which is what the vast majority of cases fall into that category. 80%, the John Hay report said 80% of those cases fell into that category. Up in Pennsylvania, the vast majority of cases that came out of the grand jury involve 15, 16, and 17-year-old boys. And so you'd think the bishops would be talking about, but they're not. They talk about pedophilia because they don't want people to see what's happening, the scandal, as a gay mafia, gay priesthood problem. But it is one, and it will never be solved until the McCarricks are removed from the hierarchy, until the Rossis are removed from the, somebody like Rossi should never have been made a priest, much less a Monsignor or head of the shrine. Somebody like McCarrick should never have been made a priest, much less a cardinal. And yet, so as long as you got guys like that in the priesthood, you're going to have victims, 15, 16, and 17-year-old boys who are victims. And to the question you say, is the entire priesthood gay? Well, no, it's not. Of course it's not all gay. No, of course not. It's not. Even though, remember Wilton Gregory said at one point in the 70s, he said, the priesthood became a gay profession at one point in the 70s or something like that. He never said that again, but it was a pretty honest comment. And unfortunately, it did largely become a gay profession, but that doesn't mean that every priest is gay. Of course that's not the case. And the good priests need to stand against the infiltration, the invasion of the priesthood by homosexuals, and they need to stand up and call out all of these guys. Because what we've seen, what we saw with McCarrick is that everybody knew that he was a gay predator, and yet nobody said that publicly. They should have said it publicly. Had they said it publicly at the very beginning, he would have been stopped. And also these seminarians, why didn't these, I wish that one of these seminarians had slugged McCarrick when he tried to sleep with him, when he tried to molest him. That's what he should have done. They should have slugged him. They should have slugged McCarrick and then called the police and said, this guy attacked me. This guy tried to have sex with me. Throw him in prison. That's what they should have done on day one with this guy. We should be telling that to the young people of the church and to the seminarians is if any member of the hierarchy or any priest makes a move on you, slug him and call the police immediately. Don't wait.
Yes,
don't discuss it with anybody. Call the police.
Right. My other concern is that we have such a normalcy bias. We're so desperate to get back to business as usual that we're praying that this will all go away, that we'll wake up in the morning and the clouds will pass. And, George, I think you'd agree this is primarily, or at root, a spiritual problem. What spiritual remedies would you recommend to our listeners?
Well, I would say that in addition to activism, which is unfortunately necessary and very direct and confrontational activism at that, there has to be, as you're saying, a heavy spiritual component to that, which means fasting, praying the rosary, appealing to God for help in stopping this problem, and obviously Catholic education needs to improve and be orthodox and be focused on holiness and not on left-wing politics and all that nonsense. We have to get back to basics, and that's the in order to restore holiness to the church. This is a problem of a lack of holiness.
Right.
It's not a problem. The bishops have these ludicrous plans for if we just have a workshop, on how to touch people appropriately. It's absolute nonsense, and it's just one big lie. They don't want to address the real problem, which is that there was an invasion of the priesthood by hedonistic homosexuals, and they've been having their way with 15, 16, and 17-year-old boys for decades.
Thank you, George Neumayr, for being our guest here on The Catholic Current. We're facing a problem that's physical, that's moral, that's legal, that's spiritual. We have to act accordingly. Through the intercession of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, may our Lord protect you from all harm and every evil to reach the happiness of heaven. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, go in peace. Please pray for me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Station of the Cross. The Station of the Cross is a listener-funded nonprofit organization. If this podcast has helped you in your spiritual journey, please consider making a donation. Donations can be made through our website, thestationofthecross.com, or by calling 1-877-888-6279. You can also donate right through our free iCatholic Radio mobile app. Thank you for listening to and supporting the Station of the Cross, proclaiming the fullness of truth with clarity and charity.